So what's up guys, welcome back to another video. I found another map like this, so we're just going to be based on this map. It's not as good quality, but it's still there. So we'll begin with a by the way, China prepared for this, with a tiny invasion of Taiwan. They would have already captured Taipei because it's around there, so that's what they did. Taiwan would have collapsed due to the invasion, and American, Japanese, and Indian soldiers would begin to take the other half of the island. The Chinese prepared for this more, would strike at the Americans, trying to flank the Americans out of the island. However, it would be unsuccessful, and nobody would have been able to capture any more land besides some little land grabs. The Philippines would join this war, giving America a better harbor to invade. Vietnam would join the war, Laos would join the war, Cambodia would join the war, and that's it for now. So at this point, the Chinese and Pakistani soldiers would be pushing up north, trying to take India's claim into Kashmir and demoralize their soldiers, because the reason why they're fighting is over the Kashmir claim. And however, India makes some small gains down south. Nothing too shocking though. Down here, China already occupies like this, believe, and they would use this as a point to strike India, to take this region, which, if you didn't know, all of this region, this is like 1 billion people in it, so this is what they're trying to do. Take a lot of Indians' population. It's not 1 billion, but this is like a lot of people. Look, South Korean soldiers would outflank the Chinese soldiers in Korea, but whilst South Korea is the 6th strongest nation, Pyeongchang would be captured, which is about right here, and China would occupy the rest of Korea for their own safety. This will cause mutinies throughout the Chinese reign over Korea, but they are successful in pushing the Koreans back, the South Koreans back. However, Japanese soldiers would come here, and in the Battle of the Sea, 20 Japanese battleships and 50 American battleships would go up against 35 Chinese battleships, and they would absolutely wreck the Chinese fleet, giving them in safe hands. Now with the Chinese fleet crippled and unorganized, the Western allies would push the Chinese back in Taiwan, in the Taiwanese area, until they completely move off of the island to protect the homeland. However, the Chinese soldiers would make a large encirclement of South Korean soldiers, which is, South Korea has like 2 million soldiers. This is like 300,000 soldiers encircled. They would be forced to surrender. However, with US and Japanese soldiers arriving because of the recent horrendous battle of the sea for China, they would attempt an encirclement. However, the Chinese would flee out, giving way for the rest of Korea to be occupied. So they would make a defensive line right over here. The Western forces would push into the defensive line would push into China until the defensive line is met. Back in India, the Chinese would keep pushing the Indians back with Pakistani forces. The Indians would make slight counterattacks, however, slowing the Chinese advance down. So the Chinese needed a quick victory. That's not going to happen with the gains India is making at this point. Down south, Indian and American soldiers will land in South Pakistan and begin a spearhead to cut the country into two. They would be stopped in their tracks and pushed back by Pakistani soldiers. However, this gives groundway to the Indians pushing the Chinese and Pakistanis back in Kashmir. India and America would begin to connect their fronts, leading an economic soldier exchange, giving India supply trains to the U.S. soldiers, and U.S. soldiers going to the front of Kashmir. This is terrible news for the Chinese. However, the Pakistanis keep pushing the U.S. soldiers back here. These two countries just decide this is not worth it and just pull out of the war. Taiwan would be released. The Chinese defensive line would begin to break, with Western forces beginning to open up the way into Manchuria. A large encirclement of Chinese soldiers will be made. This is 500,000 Chinese soldiers. With the Chinese military and cripples up north, they would begin forced conscription and not training their soldiers, which will also lead to many backlash and mutinies into the Chinese divisions. However, they would see success in the Manchurian campaign, as they have more manpower ready than the U.S. and South Korea and North Korea. The border would stagnate as some Korean push and American pushbacks would happen in the west. However, in the east, China would keep pushing back the Koreans. The Western Allies would capture the strategic location of Hainan. Hainan? I don't know. As U.S. soldiers as U.S. and Indian soldiers begins to go here, it's not going well for the rest of the American soldiers there. The American soldiers would retreat into Indian occupied land. The Pakistanis would use the last of their strength to try and force India into diverting the divisions to the central part, as they would begin to near Delhi. Chinese soldiers would also near Delhi. But then a huge Indian reserve pops out of nowhere. To the Chinese and Pakistani soldiers' shocks, they would be defeated in the Battle of New Delhi. This would lead way to the Pakistani soldiers' retreat into a defensive line which they would create in parallel with the Kashmir region. So there's logistical problems in the Indian army. Half of the generals want to stay here and keep pushing because if they lose Kashmir, they're demoralized. And the others are like, well, couldn't that happen? Or even worse, couldn't this happen? This causes friction in the military, and with that, the people that retreat, nobody gets their way, as India loses so much people in the in the next battle that they have to begin a retreat, and American soldiers would actually enter back into India. Back in Bengal, the Indians would use their Bengali reserves to defeat the Chinese at the Battle of Bengal. At the first Battle of Bengal, the Chinese would begin an encirclement of the soldiers in India, which would fail and lead into another encirclement of the encircling armies. It would be pushed back, and China would have to send more reserves to calm down the region. Then it would become a stalemate for at least that region. China would push back here, and it begins to look good for China. However, India is good allies of Russia, and Russia became kind of Chinese in this past few days. So yeah, that's a bad thing. The Western Allies would have promised Russia Manchuria, and the Japanese to recognize, would promise to recognize the claims over these islands in the Pacific. Now, this is a huge turning point in the war. China would immediately withdraw, leaving Pakistan by itself. Within days, the Indian and Chinese soldiers would cut them off and capture Islamabad, which is here. The Pakistani people overthrow the government and sign an armistice with the Western powers. The Indians would push the Chinese back with Russian aid. By the way, Russia would begin modernization at this time. So their army is actually pretty good. No action comes in this small border because nobody wants, because logistics. As Russian soldiers begins a push into China, Chinese occupied Manchuria. The Chinese Air Force would be struck by Russian Air Forces in the area, and completely destroyed within days, as they have, by no doubt, the blue team has air superiority. So at this point, China was hoping Russia would join their side, because they're the only person that could, well, not rival the USA, but rival the USA and change the tide of the war, but they joined on the Western side. So the Russians would swiftly occupy a lot of Manchuria, encircle with a huge part of the Chinese army. The Chinese would try to break the encirclement, and retreat from the area of said. However, 30% of the army in that area would be gone. If you know what I mean. Would be killed. They would encircle Port Arthur, with Russian soldiers doing the bulk of the damage to the Chinese. The Western Allies would land in China, I know this is kind of unrealistic, but remember the Chinese Navy is destroyed. The Russian Navy, the Russian Navy is there. The Chinese Air Force is destroyed. Russian Air Force, U.S. Air Force. They have captured Hainan. I think that's how you pronounce it. The Chinese would attempt to push back, but by this point Chinese propaganda would be proven to be false. As China is getting pushed back even on the Indian side of things. Tibet would also declare independence, making this situation even more dire for China, as Xinjiang declares independence. Now, that's not good for China. The Russians and Western allies would race to Beijing. As the revolution of Taiwan spreads furthermore into China. Russia would encircle Beijing and capture it. Another encirclement would be made, and so if this new, then China would surrender. So, peace treaty wise, this would be the treaty. China would also have to pay reparations to both the US, the Japanese, and stuff like that. Taiwan will get Hainan and large parts of the coast of China. Xinjiang would be released. India will gain the rest of Kashmir. Just something like this. The old government would be elected in power Pakistan again. China would recognize the claim, would recognize India's claim over this land, and if it get a little more land out of this. And finally, Tibet will be released. And of course, Mongolia, because they supported the war effort, would get a little bit of Outer Mongolia. And Korea will unify, and Japan gets this. Now, certainly new borders. This is looking, firstly, the Russia looking like the Soviet occupation of Manchuria. And last thing, Kazakhstan will unify with Russia. I know in real life, the two nations are drifting away from each other, but maybe they fixed relations. Kazakhstan was the last to leave the USSR, so they would form again. Or I mean, Russia would be communist. Would it be the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics though? And that will do it for today. If you enjoyed this video, like, and if you like my channel, please subscribe. It helps a lot. Again, this isn't targeting any culture or ethnicity, nationality. This is kind of unrealistic, I know, but realistic equals boring. And if you enjoy more content, just watch my videos. Bye.